Hello, friends, and welcome back to History Chronicles. In our last episode, we explored the courageous efforts of the civilian resistance in German-occupied France. Today, we will focus on the Vichy regime, the puppet government established by Nazi Germany in southern France, and the resistance movements that arose in response to its collaboration with the occupiers. While life under Vichy was different from the occupied zone, resistance was no less crucial. This is a story of betrayal, defiance, and the fight for freedom against not only a foreign enemy, but a government that had turned against its own people. Vichy France, a government in collaboration. After the fall of France in June 1940, the country was divided into two zones: the occupied zone in the north, under direct Nazi control, and the unoccupied zone in the south, governed by the Vichy regime under Marshal Philippe Pétain. Vichy France, although technically independent, was essentially a puppet state that collaborated with Nazi Germany. The Vichy government implemented many of the same oppressive policies as the Nazis, including harsh laws against Jews, communists, and political dissidents. Vichy leaders like Pierre Laval openly cooperated with the Germans, assisting in the deportation of French Jews to Nazi concentration camps and suppressing resistance activities. While Pétain initially retained some popular support by presenting himself as a patriotic leader, his government's actions soon revealed its betrayal of French values and sovereignty. For many French citizens, Vichy France was a symbol of national humiliation and betrayal. As the Vichy government continued to collaborate with the Nazis, resistance efforts grew in strength and determination. Life in Vichy France, a nation divided. Life in Vichy France was complex. On the surface, life in the unoccupied zone appeared less harsh than in the Nazi-occupied north. There were fewer German soldiers, and the Vichy government initially maintained some degree of autonomy. However, as the war progressed, German influence over Vichy deepened, and repression increased. The Vichy government's collaboration with the Nazis was deeply resented by many French people. Vichy passed anti-Semitic laws, confiscated property, and rounded up Jews for deportation to German concentration camps. Political dissent was not tolerated, and the regime cracked down on anyone who opposed its policies. Many French citizens became disillusioned with Pétain and began to see resistance as the only way to restore the nation's honor and independence. For the French who opposed collaboration, joining the resistance was not just about fighting the Germans, it was about fighting their own government. This unique struggle against both foreign and domestic enemies made resistance in Vichy France a dangerous and complex endeavor. The emergence of resistance in Vichy France. While the resistance in German-occupied northern France is often more widely recognized, resistance in Vichy France was no less significant. In fact, many of the resistance movements that later played crucial roles in France's liberation were born in the unoccupied zone. Resistance in Vichy France initially took the form of underground political movements. Many left-wing and communist groups, banned by Vichy, went underground and began to organize. One of the first notable resistance movements was the Franc Tireur, a socialist group that emerged in the Vichy zone in 1940. This group, like others, focused on gathering intelligence, distributing underground newspapers, and organizing sabotage missions against both Vichy and German forces. The Combat Group, led by Henri Frenay, was another prominent resistance movement that operated in Vichy France. Frenay, a former French army officer, had initially supported Pétain, but quickly became disillusioned by Vichy's collaboration with the Nazis. Combat was instrumental in gathering intelligence and passing it on to the Allies. The group also organized strikes, sabotaged German supply lines, and supported the growing network of resistance fighters. The Musée de l'Homme network, which we mentioned in the previous episode, was also active in Vichy France. They operated in both zones, gathering intelligence and supporting sabotage missions. Members of this network risked their lives to pass on crucial information to the Free French forces and the Allies. Radio Londres, a voice of hope. One of the most important sources of inspiration for the resistance in Vichy France came from Radio Londres, the BBC radio program broadcast from London by the Free French forces. General Charles de Gaulle, who had fled to Britain after the fall of France, used this platform to reach the French people directly, urging them to resist both the Germans and the Vichy regime. The broadcasts from Radio Londres served as a beacon of hope for the French people. It was through this channel that many resistance fighters first heard de Gaulle's famous appeal of June 18, 1940, calling on the French people to continue the fight against the Nazis. The radio broadcasts helped coordinate resistance efforts across the country and kept alive the spirit of defiance. Radio Londres was also a way to communicate coded messages to resistance groups. Using seemingly random phrases like the long sobs of the violins of autumn, resistance fighters knew when and where to carry out sabotage missions. The radio became a critical lifeline for the underground resistance networks in Vichy, France. Daily life of resistance fighters in Vichy, France. The life of a resistance fighter in Vichy, France was fraught with danger. Members of the resistance had to constantly stay one step ahead of both the Gestapo and the Milice, Vichy's paramilitary police force, tasked with rooting out resistance fighters. Betrayal by fellow citizens, scarcity of resources, and the constant threat of arrest or death were part of everyday life for those who chose to resist. Resistance fighters lived in the shadows, often assuming false identities and relying on secret communication networks. Many had to give up their normal lives entirely, leaving behind families and friends to join the underground movement. Some operated in rural areas, using the forests and mountains as hideouts, while others worked in cities, conducting sabotage missions and gathering intelligence. Despite these dangers, resistance members were driven by a deep sense of patriotism and a desire to see their country free from both foreign and domestic oppression. Their actions were not without risk. If caught, they faced imprisonment, torture, and often execution. Yet their determination and courage never wavered. Vichy France's response to the resistance, the milice and repression. The Vichy regime, increasingly aware of the growing resistance within its borders, created the Milice Française in 1943 to combat the growing threat of internal dissent. The milice, led by Joseph Darnand, was notorious for its brutality. They collaborated with the Gestapo to hunt down resistance fighters, often employing brutal interrogation techniques and summary executions to suppress the growing movement. The milice operated with impunity, especially in rural areas where resistance fighters had taken refuge. They raided villages, arrested suspects, and terrorized the local population in an effort to root out the resistance. Yet, despite their efforts, they could not fully suppress the movement, which only grew stronger as the war progressed. The growing repression by the milice further fueled public anger, turning even more people against the Vichy government. In many ways, the heavy-handed tactics of the milice backfired, driving more French citizens to join the resistance and fight for the liberation of their country. Conclusion: the fight continues. As the resistance in Vichy France grew in strength, it became clear that the people of France would not stand by and allow their country to remain under Nazi control or the collaborationist regime of Vichy. From the rural hillsides to the crowded cities, the resistance fighters persevered against overwhelming odds, risking their lives to restore freedom to their homeland. In our next episode, we will shift our focus to the Battle of Britain, where a new chapter of the war begins in the skies over England. We will explore how this battle marked a turning point in the fight against Nazi aggression and the significance of Britain's stand against Germany's Luftwaffe. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video. Thank you for watching. And as always, stay curious and keep exploring history with us.